The stadium lights blazed down on the 100-meter track like 1,000 suns, casting sharp shadows across the red polyurethane surface as 80,000 spectators held their collective breath. In lane 4, Maya Rodriguez crouched in her starting blocks, her carbon fiber running blade gleaming under the Tokyo Paralympic lights, while her coach, Ray Allen, sat motionless in his wheelchair 20 feet away, his weathered hands gripping the armrests so tight his knuckles had gone white. The familiar weight of pressure settled on Maya's shoulders, not just the gold medal hanging in the balance, but the dreams of a man who'd already lost everything once. The hopes of a small Texas town that had rallied behind their unlikely pair, and the promise she'd made to herself in that hospital room 3 years ago when everything seemed impossible. Ray's eyes never left his athlete as the starter raised his pistol, remembering the first time he'd seen Maya stumble across the finish line on her old prosthetic, tears streaming down her face as she collapsed in the dirt of their makeshift track behind Riverside High School. The left side of his face still drooped slightly from the stroke, his speech forever changed, but his mind remained sharp as a razor, calculating split times, analyzing her stride mechanics, feeling every ounce of her determination as if it were his own. This wasn't just about crossing a finish line first. This was about proving that broken doesn't mean finished, that champions can be forged in the fires of adversity, that a girl from the wrong side of San Antonio and a broken-down coach could rewrite the rules of what's possible. "Runners, take your mark," echoed through the stadium. And Ray closed his eyes for just a moment, transported back to that humid August afternoon when a 17-year-old amputee had rolled up to his wheelchair and asked the question that would change both their lives forever. The journey from that dusty Texas track to this moment had been paved with midnight training sessions, insurance battles, family doubts, and the kind of small miracles that happen when stubborn hearts refuse to surrender. And now, as Maya settled into her blocks one final time, Ray Allen was about to discover whether faith and determination could overcome a lifetime of obstacles. Hello, my friends. Before we continue our story, leave your like, share the story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. The stroke hit Ray Allen like a linebacker blindsiding a quarterback. Sudden and devastating. On a Tuesday morning in August 2019, while he was setting up hurdles on the practice track at Riverside High School in San Antonio's east side. One moment, he was adjusting the height on lane 3, calculating the precise measurements that had made him legendary among Texas high school coaches for 32 years. And the next, he was face down in the red dirt, his left side refusing to respond to his brain's frantic commands. The paramedics found him 20 minutes later when the assistant principal came looking for him, his speech slurred beyond recognition, his coaching whistle still clutched in his right hand like a lifeline to the world he was about to lose. Ray had been born and raised in this neighborhood, where chain-link fences separated tiny yards from abandoned lots, where the corner stores had bulletproof glass and the high school track team was often the only thing standing between kids and the streets. His father had worked double shifts at the Ford plant, his mother cleaned houses for wealthy families on the north side, and Ray had learned early that hard work and discipline were the only currencies that mattered. After 4 years in the Army, 2 tours in Iraq that left him with a purple heart and a limp he'd never talk about, he'd come home to teach physical education and coach track, turning Riverside's program into a powerhouse that regularly sent kids to college on full scholarships. The rehabilitation center smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, filled with people learning to walk again, to speak again, to believe in themselves again. Ray's left arm hung useless at his side, his speech reduced to frustrated grunts and half-formed words, while physical therapists with relentless optimism pushed him through exercises that felt like climbing Mount Everest with a backpack full of stones. "You're making progress, Mr. Allen," they'd say. But Ray knew the truth. He'd never coach again, never demonstrate proper form, never chase down athletes who were cutting corners on their workouts. His wife Sarah had stood by him through those dark months, driving him to appointments, helping him with buttons and shoelaces, pretending not to notice when he turned away from the news coverage of track meets he should have been coaching. Their daughter Jessica, now a nurse in Houston, called every day with forced cheerfulness, asking about his therapy sessions and avoiding the elephant in the room that the man who'd spent his life building champions was now struggling to feed himself. The insurance money covered the basics, but Ray's identity, his purpose, his reason for getting up every morning had been stripped away faster than a sprinter breaking the tape. The wheelchair became his new reality 6 months later. When the doctors finally admitted what Ray had known all along, his left leg wasn't coming back. His speech would always be affected, and the active life he'd lived for 60 years was over. He'd fought the chair for weeks, using a walker with grim determination, stumbling through the house like a newborn colt until the day he fell trying to reach a water glass and Sarah found him crying on the kitchen floor. "There's no shame in adapting," she'd whispered. But Ray felt nothing but shame as they measured him for the custom wheelchair, as they removed the throw rugs from the hallway, as they installed grab bars in the bathroom. The defining moment came on a muggy September afternoon when Ray forced Sarah to drive him past Riverside High School, just to see the track where he'd spent half his life. The new coach, a young guy fresh out of college, with a whistle around his neck and stars in his eyes, was working with the distance runners, and Ray watched through the chain-link fence as the kids ran the same drills he'd taught them, following the same patterns he'd laid out decades ago. A group of varsity boys jogged past the fence, and one of them, Marcus, who'd been Ray's best 400-meter runner, stopped and stared, his face cycling through recognition, pity, and awkward embarrassment before he mumbled "Hey coach" and hurried away. That night, Ray sat in his garage workshop, surrounded by the trophies and medals and newspaper clippings that documented 32 years of coaching excellence, and seriously considered whether his story was finished. The man who'd built his life on teaching kids to overcome obstacles couldn't find a way over his own. And the irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent decades preaching about mental toughness and perseverance, and now he was ready to quit at the first real challenge of his adult life. But somewhere, in the darkness of that garage, surrounded by the ghosts of championships past, Ray Allen made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't ready to stop being a coach, he just needed to figure out how to do it from a wheelchair. **** Maya Rodriguez first appeared at Ray's front door on a drizzling October morning, her knuckles barely making a sound on the weather-beaten wood as she struggled to balance on her outdated prosthetic leg. She was 17, all elbows and determination, with her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and her grandmother's rosary hanging around her neck like armor against the world's cruelties. "Coach Allen," she said when Sarah answered the door, her voice carrying the slight accent of someone who'd grown up switching between Spanish and English. "I heard you used to train runners, and I need someone to teach me how to be fast." Ray was in his wheelchair in the living room, watching highlights and feeling sorry for himself, when Sarah led the girl inside and he got his first look at the kid who would save his life. Maya's prosthetic was clearly second-hand, maybe third-hand, held together with duct tape and determination, attached to what remained of her left leg below the knee, a war wound from a drunk driver who'd taken more than just her limb when he'd plowed into her family's car on I-35 2 years earlier. She stood there in their modest living room, surrounded by Ray's coaching memorabilia, and laid out her impossible dream with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd already survived the worst thing that could happen to her. "I want to make the Paralympic team," Maya announced, as if she were discussing the weather or asking for directions to the grocery store. "I've been training by myself behind the Dairy Queen on Zarzamora Street, running against the high school kids who hang out there, and I'm getting faster, but I don't know the technical stuff." Ray nearly choked on his coffee. This kid, with her bargain basement prosthetic and her backyard training regimen, was talking about competing against the best Paralympic athletes in the world. Runners who'd been training since childhood with million-dollar equipment and world-class coaches. But there was something in Maya's eyes that reminded Ray of his best athletes, the ones who'd gone on to college scholarships and state championships, a burning intensity that couldn't be taught or faked, the kind of hunger that separated real competitors from kids who just liked to run fast. She told him about working nights at her uncle's restaurant to help pay for her prosthetic, about doing her homework in the back booth while the dinner rush swirled around her, about getting up at 5 a.m. to train before school because it was the only time she had to herself. My grandmother says, "You're the best coach in San Antonio," Maya continued. And she says champions recognize champions, even when they're broken. Ray's first instinct was to send her away gently, to explain that he wasn't coaching anymore, that Paralympic training required resources and expertise he didn't have, that dreams needed to be realistic to avoid heartbreak. But something in Maya's posture, the way she stood straighter when she talked about running, the way her whole face lit up when she described the feeling of speed, reminded him of why he'd fallen in love with coaching in the first place. "Show me," he said finally, the words coming out slightly slurred but clear enough. And Maya's smile could have powered the entire east side for a week. The next morning, Ray found himself at the old track behind Riverside High for the first time since his stroke, his wheelchair bumping over the uneven asphalt as Maya warmed up with a series of awkward hops and stretches. She'd brought her school clothes in a backpack, planning to change after their session and sprint to first period. And Ray was struck by the parallels to his own youth, the hunger, the improvisation, the absolute refusal to let circumstances define possibilities. "Let's see what you've got," he called out, positioning his wheelchair at the finish line. And Maya took off down the 100-meter straightaway, with all the grace of a newborn giraffe, learning to walk. Her form was terrible, arms flailing, stride uneven, landing hard on her prosthetic with each step, but her raw speed was undeniable. And more importantly, her heart was written all over her face as she crossed the finish line and immediately turned around, ready to run again. Ray clicked his stopwatch to 18.2 seconds for 100 meters. Laughably slow by Paralympic standards, but absolutely flying for a girl who'd been training herself behind a fast food restaurant. "We've got work to do," Ray announced, and Maya nodded eagerly, not realizing that her new coach was talking as much to himself as to her, because for the first time since his stroke, Ray Allen felt like he had a purpose again. That afternoon, Ray sat in his garage workshop with a yellow legal pad, sketching out training plans and equipment modifications with the same methodical precision he'd once used to design championship programs. Maya's prosthetic was a joke. Her technique was raw, and they had no money, no facilities, and no support system. But they had something more valuable than any of those things. They had each other's hunger. And Ray was starting to remember that champions weren't born in fancy training centers. They were forged in the fires of impossible circumstances by people who refused to accept limitations. The first month of training nearly broke them both. As Ray tried to coach from his wheelchair while Maya struggled with a prosthetic that seemed determined to sabotage every stride, the old track behind Riverside High became their sanctuary. A place where Ray could forget about his limitations and focus on the familiar rhythm of building an athlete from the ground up. Maya would arrive at dawn, her breath visible in the cool Texas morning air, and Ray would already be there in his wheelchair, stopwatch in hand, ready to push her through workouts that would have challenged healthy athletes with proper equipment. "Your stride is all wrong," Ray would call out, his speech still slightly slurred but his coaching instincts sharp as ever. "You're fighting the prosthetic instead of working with it. Think of it as part of your body, not something attached to your body." Maya would nod and adjust, stumble and fall, get back up and try again. Her determination as relentless as the South Texas sun that beat down on them during afternoon sessions. Ray's right hand cramped from gripping his stopwatch. His back ached from the awkward angles of coaching from a wheelchair. But he pushed through the discomfort because he could see something special developing in Maya's raw talent. The financial reality of Paralympic training hit them like a sledgehammer to the chest when they researched the cost of a proper running prosthetic, $15,000 for a basic model, $25,000 for something that could compete at the elite level. Maya's family was barely making ends meet with her mother's job at the medical center and her father's construction work. And Ray's disability payments didn't leave room for luxuries like world-class athletic equipment. They applied for grants, reached out to prosthetic companies, and even started a crowdfunding campaign that raised $347 in 3 weeks. Enough to buy a decent pair of running shoes, but not much else. Ray's old coaching network proved to be both a blessing and a curse, as former colleagues and athlete parents offered sympathy and platitudes, but very little practical help. "It's wonderful what you're doing," they'd say. "But Paralympic training is so specialized, maybe you should find her a coach who understands that world." The message was clear. Ray was yesterday's news, a charity case trying to play in a league where he didn't belong. Even Maya's high school coach, the young guy who'd replaced Ray, suggested she might want to focus on more realistic goals, like making the varsity team. The breakthrough came during a particularly brutal training session in November, when Maya's prosthetic finally gave up completely, the knee joint snapping during a sprint interval and sending her tumbling onto the track in a heap of frustration and tears. Ray wheeled over to where she sat in the dirt, her face buried in her hands. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, just two broken people wondering if they were chasing an impossible dream. "I can't do this," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant traffic on Interstate 35. "I'm fooling myself, aren't I?" Ray looked at this 17-year-old girl who'd been working 2 jobs to pay for her training, who'd been getting up at 5 a.m. every morning to run with equipment held together by duct tape and dreams, who'd never missed a single session despite having every excuse in the world to quit. "You know what I learned in the army?" he said, his words coming out slowly but clearly. "The only way to fail is to stop trying. Everything else is just a temporary setback." Maya looked up at him, her eyes red from crying, and Ray made a decision that would change everything. They were going to build her prosthetic themselves. That weekend, Ray's garage transformed into a combination workshop and laboratory, as he used his old teaching skills to research biomechanics, study engineering principles, and design a custom running prosthetic using whatever materials they could afford. Maya brought her uncle Carlos, who worked as a welder, and together the 3 of them spent hours cutting, shaping, and testing different configurations. The first prototype was a disaster, too heavy, too rigid, and uncomfortable enough to leave Maya with blisters after 10 minutes of wearing it. But the second version was better, and the third version was actually functional. And by the 4th prototype, Maya was running faster than she'd ever run in her life. Ray's wife, Sarah, watched from the kitchen window as her husband came alive again, his eyes bright with purpose as he tinkered with carbon fiber and aluminum, his voice strong and confident as he explained leverage points and energy transfer to Maya and Carlos. "He's coaching again," she told her daughter Jessica during one of their nightly phone calls, "not just the running stuff, but teaching them how to think like engineers, how to solve problems, how to believe in themselves. I haven't seen him this happy since before the stroke." And for the first time in months, Sarah began to believe that maybe their story wasn't over after all. Maybe it was just beginning a new chapter. Asterisk. The turning point came on a frigid January morning when Maya clocked 15.8 seconds in the 100 meters, a time that would have been impossible just 3 months earlier, running on their homemade prosthetic that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Ray sat in his wheelchair at the finish line, staring at his stopwatch in disbelief, while Maya jogged back to him with a grin that could have melted the frost on the track. "Did I just run what I think I ran?" she asked, and Ray nodded slowly, his coaching brain already calculating splits and projecting improvements. Realizing that his broken-down athlete with the jury-rigged equipment had just posted a time that would qualify for regional Paralympic competitions, word of their unconventional partnership began to spread through the tight-knit community of adaptive athletics, carried by social media posts and word-of-mouth stories about the girl from San Antonio's side who was training with equipment built in her coach's garage. Dr. Patricia Williams, a sports scientist from UT San Antonio who specialized in prosthetic biomechanics, reached out after seeing a video of Maya's training session, offering to analyze her gait and suggest improvements to their homemade design. "What you've accomplished here is remarkable," Dr. Williams told Ray during their first meeting, examining the prosthetic with the reverence of someone who understood the engineering challenges they'd overcome. "This is PhD-level biomechanics. Built with high school shop class tools, Ray's transformation was as dramatic as Maya's improvement in times, as he rediscovered his identity not just as a coach but as a teacher, an innovator, and a mentor who could see potential where others saw only obstacles. The garage workshop became a classroom where Maya learned about physics and engineering alongside sprint mechanics, where she developed the mental toughness that would carry her through the psychological challenges of elite competition. Champions are made in the mind first, Ray would tell her during their technical sessions. His speech clearer now from the constant practice of explaining complex concepts. The body just follows where the mind leads. The first real test came at the Texas Paralympic qualifier in Austin, where Maya would face established athletes with professional coaching staffs and equipment that cost more than most people's cars. Ray's hands shook as he loaded Maya's homemade prosthetic into the back of his modified van. The reality of what they were attempting finally hitting him. They were about to compete against the best Paralympic athletes in the state with equipment they'd built themselves and training methods that existed nowhere in any coaching manual. "You scared?" Maya asked as they drove through the early morning darkness toward Austin, and Ray smiled, remembering the same question from nervous athletes before big meets throughout his coaching career. Terrified, he admitted, but then he looked at Maya, in the passenger seat, her competition bag packed with backup parts they'd machined themselves. Her face calm with the confidence of someone who'd already overcome impossible odds just to get this far. But scared doesn't mean unprepared, and we've done the work. The Austin track was intimidating. Pristine facilities, electronic timing systems, and warm-up areas filled with athletes who looked like they'd stepped off magazine covers. Maya's homemade prosthetic drew stares and whispers, but Ray had taught her to use doubt as fuel, to turn skepticism into motivation. The preliminary heats were a revelation, as Maya not only qualified for the finals but posted the third fastest time of the day. Her 14.9 seconds announced over the loudspeaker while Ray punched the air from his wheelchair and Maya stood in lane 6 with tears streaming down her face. "We belong here," she whispered to Ray as they prepared for the final, and he nodded, knowing that regardless of what happened in the next race, they'd already proven something important, that champions could come from anywhere, could be built from anything, could overcome any obstacle if they had enough heart and the right person in their corner. The final was a masterpiece of tactical racing. As Maya held her form through the first 50 meters, began to pull away from the field through the curve, and then unleashed a finishing kick that Ray had never seen from her before, crossing the line in 14.2 seconds to win her first Paralympic qualifier and earn her spot on the regional team. Ray's wheelchair was surrounded by reporters and other coaches wanting to know about the miracle they'd witnessed. But all he could focus on was Maya, standing on the podium with her homemade prosthetic gleaming in the afternoon sun, singing along to the national anthem with the same intensity she brought to every sprint that night. In a hotel room in Austin, Ray sat at the small desk with his laptop, writing the most important email of his coaching career, a message to the head coach of the U.S. Paralympic team, requesting consideration for Maya Rodriguez and outlining their unconventional journey from a backyard track to the winner's circle. "We might not look like your typical Paralympic program," he wrote, "but we've got something that can't be taught in any training manual. We've got heart, we've got innovation, and we've got a girl who refuses to let anything stop her from chasing her dreams." As he hit send, Ray realized that his stroke hadn't ended his coaching career. It had just prepared him for the most important athlete he'd ever train. The call came on a Tuesday in March while Maya was in trigonometry class and Ray was in his garage workshop, fine-tuning the latest version of their prosthetic design. "Coach Allen, this is Michael Torres from USA Paralympic Track and Field," the voice on the other end said, and Ray's heart stopped as he recognized the name. Torres was the head coach, the man who selected the team that would represent America in Tokyo. "We've been watching Maya's times, and we'd like to invite her to the national training camp in Colorado Springs. If she performs well there, she could make the Paralympic team." Ray's hands trembled as he called Maya out of class, and when she heard the news, she screamed so loudly that the entire school heard her through the closed door of the principal's office. The training camp was in 6 weeks, and it would be the biggest test of their unconventional partnership. Maya would be training alongside established Paralympic champions, using the same facilities where Olympic legends had honed their craft, competing for one of only 3 spots on the team in her classification. "This is it," Ray told her, as they drove home from school. "This is what we've been working toward since that first day you showed up at my door." The Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs was intimidating in ways that Ray hadn't anticipated. Not just the world-class facilities and the wall of champion photos, but the subtle messages that their homemade approach wasn't welcome. In this rarefied atmosphere, other coaches looked at Ray's wheelchair with pity, at Maya's prosthetic with skepticism, and at their father-daughter dynamic with barely concealed condescension. "You're not what we expected," one assistant coach told Ray during check-in. And Ray smiled, remembering all the times he'd been underestimated throughout his life. Maya's first training session was a disaster, as the altitude and the pressure combined to produce her worst times in months. And Ray watched from his wheelchair as she struggled with self-doubt for the first time. Since they'd started working together, "I don't belong here," she whispered to him after a particularly rough interval workout. And Ray saw the same fear in her eyes that he'd felt in his own garage on those dark nights after his stroke. "Champions aren't made by belonging," he told her, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades of coaching experience. "Champions are made by earning their place, and you've already done that." The breakthrough came during a biomechanics session with the team's sports scientists, who were amazed by the engineering innovations Ray and Maya had developed in their garage workshop. "This is remarkable," Dr. Jennifer Kim told them, examining Maya's prosthetic with the same respect she'd shown to million-dollar equipment. "You've solved problems that our research team has been working on for years." Word spread through the training center about the coach and athlete who'd built their own equipment, and suddenly their unconventional approach was being seen as innovative. Rather than amateur, the selection race was held on a perfect Colorado morning, with the Rocky Mountains providing a stunning backdrop as Maya settled into the starting blocks for the most important 100 meters of her life. Ray positioned his wheelchair at the finish line, his stopwatch ready, his heart pounding as he watched Maya go through her pre-race routine, the same rituals they'd developed on that dusty track behind Riverside High School. "She's ready," he whispered to himself. And as the starter raised his pistol, Ray said a silent prayer to whatever gods watch over broken coaches and determined athletes. The race was over in 13.8 seconds. A new personal best that not only earned Maya a spot on the Paralympic team, but established her as a legitimate contender for a medal in Tokyo. Ray's wheelchair was mobbed by reporters and officials, but all he could see was Maya, standing in lane 4 with her arms raised in triumph, her homemade prosthetic gleaming in the Colorado sun. "We did it, coach!" she shouted over the crowd noise, and Ray nodded, his eyes filling with tears as he realized that his stroke hadn't ended his story. It had just prepared him for the most important chapter. That evening, at the team announcement ceremony, Ray sat on the stage next to Maya as she was officially named to the U.S. Paralympic team, the first athlete he'd ever coached to reach that level. The head coach introduced them as the most inspiring partnership in Paralympic sport, and Ray thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that first morning when Maya had knocked on his door, to the midnight sessions in his garage, to this moment when their impossible dream had become reality. "This is just the beginning," Maya whispered to him as the crowd applauded. And Ray smiled, knowing that whatever happened in Tokyo, they'd already accomplished something that couldn't be measured in seconds or medals. They'd proven that broken doesn't mean finished, that champions can come from anywhere, and that the most powerful force in sports isn't technology or money, but the bond between a coach and an athlete who refuse to give up on each other. The gold medal ceremony in Tokyo was everything Ray had dreamed of and more. As Maya stood on the top step of the podium, with tears streaming down her face, her homemade prosthetic a testament to the power of innovation born from necessity. The American flag rose slowly as the national anthem played, and Ray sat in his wheelchair in the coaching section, his own eyes wet with tears as he watched the girl who'd saved his life receive the recognition she'd earned through years of 5 a.m. workouts and refusing to accept limitations. The medal was beautiful, but the real victory was the journey, the proof that champions could be forged anywhere, by anyone willing to believe in the impossible. In the months that followed Tokyo, Ray's garage workshop became a pilgrimage site for adaptive athletes and coaches from around the world, all wanting to learn from the man who'd revolutionized prosthetic design using nothing but determination and hardware store materials. Maya had gone on to study bioengineering at Stanford, planning to design the next generation of prosthetics for Paralympic athletes. But she still came home to San Antonio every Christmas to train with Ray on the same track where their partnership had begun. "You saved my life," she told him during one of those visits, and Ray laughed, knowing that she'd saved his just as much. The stroke had taken Ray's mobility, his speech, and his original coaching career. But it had given him something even more valuable: the wisdom to see potential where others saw only problems, the patience to build champions from the ground up, and the understanding that the best victories are the ones shared with people who matter. Maya's gold medal hung in his garage workshop, right next to the pictures of all his other athletes. But it represented something different, not just athletic achievement, but the triumph of the human spirit over circumstances that seemed insurmountable. Ray Allen had learned that coaches don't need to be perfect to change lives. They just need to be present, to believe, and to never give up on the athletes who need them most.